This is a narration of a presentation entitled "The Transportation Regulatory Threat to the Economy" by Wendell Cox of Demographia, presented to the American Highway Users Alliance Conference in Washington, D.C. on June 23, 2010. I'm going to talk about the role of mobility and transportation in having developed the prosperous U.S. economy, how current public policy proposals would create a grave threat to the future prosperity of the economy, the importance of mobility historically as well as in the reduction of poverty, and the role of greenhouse gas emissions in the future of personal mobility in the United States and around the world. Since World War II, we have seen a democratization of prosperity, especially in the United States. We can go around the world, as this picture indicates here, taken from the Rochinda favela or shantytown in Rio de Janeiro, looking down on the luxury condominiums. The fact is that every nation has its rich people. You can go to Bangladesh, for example, as I did a couple of years ago, and see rich people living in Gulshan and other places. At the same time, however, the difference between Bangladesh or Brazil or Mexico and the United States and other Western democracies is the size of the middle class. We have a strong middle class which has been brought about by this democratization of prosperity, which quite frankly has been driven, at least to some degree, by the personal mobility of our transportation system. You can see, by the way, that improving economic fortunes are not guaranteed. Look at Argentina and compare that to Australia and the United States in the early part of the 20th century. At one time, Argentina was one of the strongest economies in the world before the coming of Juan Perón and his failed economic policies. Yet you can see that Argentina has not progressed well relative to other nations in the world. You can see China with huge improvements occurring in recent years from a very small base. You can see India not doing quite as well, but still doing well compared to their small base. And you can see, for example, Kenya used as an example of Africa, really making very little progress either before or after the end of colonialization. A lot of people don't realize it, but we have by far the most affluent urban areas in the world. 40 of the top 50 metropolitan areas in the world, based upon gross domestic product per capita, are in the United States. This being from data provided through the OECD and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. One of the factors that a lot of people, especially urban planners, always like to complain about is the low density of American urban areas. You can see on this chart that the average urban area, major urban area in the United States, is about 3,000 people per square mile. A little bit higher in Australia, still higher in Canada. Western Europe is more than double the density of American urban areas, and of course the United Kingdom is the most dense of the major Western nations at nearly 12,000 people per square mile, and that is seen as a sign of a problem to a lot of people with respect to the United States versus the rest of the world. Yet we live very well. You can see beyond that another concern of planners, and that is that we are so dependent upon cars. You can see that in the United States, we're more than 95% dependent upon cars. And if you talk to people who are trying to sell European models to America, you could well get the impression that most travel in Europe is by public transport. Not so. The difference between the United States and Europe in the use of cars is only minimal. With respect to surface transportation, something like 85% of travel in Europe is by car. So Europe is clearly car-oriented, and of course, we've all heard about the fabled American love affair with the automobile. Well, I would suggest that a Europe in which gasoline costs $6 to $7 per gallon and still is traveling by car for 80% or more of its travel has a much more intense love affair with the automobile than we Americans could ever dream of. You can see the advantages of America's low-density, automobile-oriented society by looking at the one-way average travel times to work around the world. You see our slowest travel times are in New York, not surprisingly, because it is the largest urban area in terms of physical expanse. We could call it the most sprawling in the world. It is our largest urban area, and of course, much more of travel in New York is on transit than in other urban areas, and transit's slower, but still, the average work trip in New York is only about 32 minutes. You can see other places, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Phoenix, range down to even below 25 minutes each way. You go to the Canadian urban areas where there's all sorts of claims about how superior they are to us. In fact, travel times in Vancouver, which is a relatively small urban area, are worse than New York. Montreal and Toronto are much worse. You go to Europe, you find in Paris the average travel time worse than New York. And then you go to the Asian first world urban areas, Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Yokohama, you get to the 40 to 50 minute one-way work trip. And so our low-density, auto-oriented economy means that we spend less time getting to work. Yet despite these faster travel times and this better life we live, there is a very strong movement in the urban planning community which has taken great hold in public policy to reduce future expansion of highways, if not stopping it completely, which would of course increase traffic congestion. There is an interest in getting us out of our cars and onto transit. There is an actual contempt for suburban development as public policies that have been adopted in a number of U.S. urban areas basically force new development to be principally within the current urban footprint and do not allow material or large suburban developments anymore. And of course, the same interests would like to put limits on the expansion and placement of big box stores, which would of course lead to higher prices in the longer run. The real threat then is fourfold. It is anti-highway, it is anti-car, it is anti-suburban, it is anti-big box store, and it is important to recognize that this is not a new agenda. This is an agenda that has been out there for decades among planners who have really virtual contempt for the American way of life. You can see the kinds of things that they would propose in the in publications like Moving Cooler, Growing Cooler, and even Driving in the Built Environment, three major publications that analyze the potential for trying to force more compact development. But this new agenda, this agenda, which is not new, I should say, has been intensified by the interest in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which I will describe a bit later. In the Kerry-Lieberman cap and trade bill, for example, there are incentives proposed to try to get metropolitan areas to impose land use regulations that are similar to the kinds of regulations in California and Oregon and Washington and the Northeast that did so much to propel house prices way above historic norms and led to the very destructive economic bubble. In the transportation reauthorization draft, which is out there at the moment, there are, in addition to these kinds of incentives for governments, there would also be serious restrictions on the ability to build urban highway expansion. With all of these ideas to try to get us out of our cars and out of the suburbs and so on, there is a virtual missing of the importance of congestion and its costs on the economy. But we all know about it. Every year the Texas Transportation Institute estimates the congestion costs in major urban areas around the world. The most recent study suggests that the personal costs of congestion are about $15.50 per hour, and that for trucks it is $102. The fact is, congestion is costly, and the economy requires, that is, economic growth in the long run, is going to require that we get the costs of congestion under control. We start with the recognition that population density, increased population density, increases traffic congestion. This slide is superimposed on a picture of the congestion of Hong Kong. But world data makes it very clear that as population densities increase, traffic congestion increases as well. The same is true in the United States, where the most recent data from INRIX indicates that the amount of extra time that it is necessary to travel during peak periods because of congestion grows with population density. And there also are the issues with respect to freight in the economy. I mean, if the freight is not moving, the economy is not likely to be moving. And so we have seen areas that have been leaders in this new planning philosophy, which we call smart growth or compact cities or various other names. But we have seen urban areas that have gone, shall we